Hi everyone, welcome to the Property Podcast. It's Rob B here, of course joined by Rob D, and we've got an episode we can really geek out over this week. It's non-property books that you should read to become a better investor.
Yes, indeed it is. We're a right couple of bookworms. We've been doing lots of reading, pulling out some amazing books for you to check out. Not property books, but as we go along, we'll explain why these books are so powerful. So that's coming up. I think this is going to be a really good episode. But before we get into all that, I believe congratulations are in order, Mr. B. You've made your first investment of the year.
Well, it's not gone through yet, but yes, very excited. It's in Sheffield. More on that in the future, but yeah, it's just nice to get one under the belt so early on in the year. I was saying earlier before we started recording, Rob, I'll have to do an update on some of the stuff we've done last year and maybe include some of the stuff we're looking at or doing this year as well. I know those episodes are very popular, so we'll keep you updated. But yeah, real cracker, this one. Very excited, very pleased to get it. And yeah, look forward to telling everybody more in the future.
Excellent. And yeah, we must make the update episode happen. We'll pencil that one in. Also worth celebrating is tonight is Meetup night. First Thursday of the month. That can only mean one thing. It means that we're doing meetups all over the country. I'm going to be heading down to Brighton for the relaunch of the Brighton Meetup. We had one in the past, then it dropped away, but it's come back again. I'm sure it's going to be super strong. I'm always happy to have an excuse to go and see the sea and have some fish and chips. And if I can meet some nice property people into the bargain, well, that's just even better. So whether you get to Brighton or anywhere else in the country or beyond, just go to thepropertyhub.net/meetup so you can book your free place there.
And remember, Rob, to bring back some rock so you can throw it at me for being naughty and being now unable to attend the Waterloo meetup. Boo. I apologise. Someone in my team booked me in for something and hadn't given me the correct date. So now I have to work instead. And I apologise profusely to everybody who's going to the Waterloo meetup. But still go anyway, because it's an awesome venue, an awesome meetup, and you'll have a great time.
Sounds like someone at RMP is getting fired.
Bring 2 pieces of rock. I can throw one at them.
And in happier news, in really happy news for us, we've made another appearance on the Tropical MBA podcast. So you might have remember us talking about this a few months ago. Our favourite podcast that isn't our own is the Tropical MBA. We've been listening to it for years. It's the podcast that we bonded over when we first met, really. We were on it talking about property a while back, and then we made a repeat performance this week talking about business and really enjoyed doing it. And I think even though it's not about property, it's worth a listen because there's some ideas in there that I think you can apply to lots of different things, to your property business or to anything else. And I really enjoyed Rob's kind of zooming out and talking about what we do with the podcast and everything else. And it kind of made me realize how lucky, I knew it anyway, how lucky we are to have this super cool community and be able to spend all our time sort of talking about what we love talking about and doing business in a way that feels right to us.
Yeah, it felt like almost therapy, like reflecting on how we've got to where we've got to and how, as you say, how lucky we are to have built this amazing community that allows us to do exciting things. And you tell us what to do as well through the things you request from us. So yeah, it was a really, really nice moment. The podcast, as Rob mentioned, is our favourite, how we bonded. So it feels like a real nice moment for us personally. Probably won't mean so much to everyone listening, but to us as huge fans of the podcast, to go on and talk about property and then to go on and talk about business is just super, super cool. I think you'll really enjoy the podcast if you go and listen to it. So give it a go. It's the Tropical MBA. Of course, we will link to it in our show notes, which this week you can find at thepropertyhub.net/non-property books.
Okay, so before we hear about some of those non-property books, we've just got time for our news story. And the story here is from This Is Money, and it's house prices set to rise for the next 50 years and outstrip incomes even further, warns ex-Bank of England economist. So a bit of a warning in there. How much do you trust an ex-Bank of England economist? It's the current Bank of England economist who said that he famously didn't understand pensions and got himself into a bit of trouble. But anyway, the story is exactly like the headline makes it sound. He has kind of looked at it and go, well, the last 20 odd years have had absolutely massive house price growth. So you could look at it 2 ways. You could either say, well, that's going to continue because there's some reason behind this. Or you could say, well, this is a massive bubble that needs to be reversed at some point. And he's saying that in his analysis, house prices are just going to keep going up in the same pattern for the next 50 years, outstripping incomes even more. Now, I promise this isn't just because I've got a beef with the Bank of England, anyone who's worked there. There's sort of something missing in this for me, which is that if house prices keep on outstripping incomes, then there's got to be a point where house prices can't go up any further unless mortgage restrictions are relaxed even further. And recently, mortgages have been going the other way. Affordability tests have been getting harder. So I'm not entirely sure that this is the full picture, but I do agree that we're not in some kind of normo bubble and everything's going to drop by 50% or any of that. But presumably, for all my skepticism, he does have access to lots of data and sort of smart people and inside info. It's just interesting to see his prediction.
We can't have a go at someone for making predictions, Rob. We make a few ourselves, so we've got to be careful. But where we don't need to be careful is over our love of books. This wasn't hard to do this week's episode, was it, Rob?
Not at all. We love talking about books. Every year at sort of one of our final episodes of the year, we run through some of the favourite books that we've read that year. So we thought, because those episodes are always so popular, that today we'd specifically talk about 5 non-property books that you should read to become a better investor. So you can read books about property, of course you can, and that's very useful to learn kind of tactical and specific things that you need to know. But there's so much that you can learn from other books that never mention the word property necessarily, but because property is a business, you can learn absolutely loads that you can apply to what you're doing and make yourself a better investor. So we're going to talk about 5 of the best books that we've read recently that we think you can take a lot away from. Now, most of these are new. We have not mentioned these on the podcast ever before. The first one we have, but it's very much worth flagging up again, Rob, because it is such an inspiring book.
It is. And I'm holding back. I can't tell you how much self-discipline this is taking for me not to do his accent and some cheesy quotes from one of his films. Yes, you may have guessed it. It's Arnold Schwarzenegger. And his book, Total Recall, is an absolute barnstormer of a book. Brilliant. I think it's safe to say it's one of the best books we've both read in the last few years. We both raved about this book after digging into it. Super, super cool. If you think Arnie is a actor who managed to wriggle his way into politics, think again. This guy has done so much. He's so driven. There's so much you can learn from him. His mindset, the way he approaches things, his ability to go after huge, big goals when people would look at him before he started and say you have no right to achieve those goals. I love this because he's come from nothing and he's made himself something very impressive. And yes, he's got his critics, but what you can't deny is his success and his track record for delivering and results. But why is it in the property book? Well, other than being inspired, the mindset part of the book is huge. I think that's massive. And Arnie will talk about that in the book, how mindset is so important. But the reason why this is number 1 in the list, or the first one we're certainly talking about, is that Arnie actually made his money through property before he was famous. So most people would assume, and I was one of them before I'd read the book, that Arnie made his money through his acting. And he has made a lot of money through acting. But Arnie actually became a multi-millionaire through property before he was famous, which is incredible because that was a multi-millionaire back in the early 80s. When $1 million was a lot more than it is today. So a really, really interesting book. One for property investors, for mindset, to be inspired about his property journey, and just to learn from a guy who sets big goals and goes chasing them.
Yeah, if you do have any preconceptions about him, I'd very much encourage you to put them aside, because if you're not aware of the things that he's done, you will be blown away. And the way that he talks about how he just kind of fixes a vision in his mind of what he's going to do and just does completely unreasonable things that you never would have thought possible in order to get there, it is quite amazing. Very much worth checking out. So the next book that we've picked is by somebody else who's very successful, but it's inspiring in a different way, I think. So it's by Scott Adams. He's now like a blogger and author and media commentator, but he made his money and became very famous as the author of the Dilbert cartoons that syndicated across like thousands of newspapers. And the book is called How to Fail at Almost Everything and Still Win Big. So he's extremely successful. He's made a lot of money, but he's done it in a very different way from Arnie. So Arnold became great at certain things. He became a great investor. He was a great business person. He became the greatest bodybuilder. But Scott Adams has failed at pretty much everything. And there's no one thing that he's that amazing at. And that's the whole point of the book. There's actually loads of different ideas in the book, but there are a couple of ideas that I think are really powerful because they make everything sound so achievable. So one of those is the concept of talent stacking. So this is the idea that rather than having to be absolutely world class at one particular thing, if you can be pretty good at two or more different things, that combination can be unique and give you a unique advantage. So to give you one example, I know a fair bit about property. I'm not a bad investor. I'm not the best, but I'm okay. And I'm a pretty good writer. Not the best, but pretty good. And the combination of those two things means that I've been able to find a niche that I've been very successful in, which is writing property books. So not the best author, not the best investor, but combine the two, stack those two talents, and I've managed to achieve something. So to take a property example, maybe you are pretty good at adding value to a property, but being able to reconfigure it to squeeze in some more rooms or something. But you're not amazing at it. You're pretty good. And you're also pretty good at negotiation, but you don't have to be the best. You combine those two things and you're managing to buy a property at a good price and add some good value to it. And by combining those, you then end up with an asset that's worth far more than you paid for it. And there's loads of other examples as well. And I like that because it kind of feels more doable. You can just be pretty good at a couple of things that are a useful combination rather than having to be an absolute beast at one particular thing. There's also the idea of systems versus goals, which I really like. So when he's talking about systems, he's really talking about sort of sub-goals and habits. And so it's saying that rather than having a huge goal that you need to pursue with all your energy every day, all you need to have is a system that forces you to do the right things every day. So basically just have the right habits, just do a little bit every day, and you'll eventually get there. So I find it a really interesting book and a really inspiring book because it kind of gives you another model for success. You don't have to be one of these absolute kind of like towering figures like Arnie. You can just find a way of making the most of whatever talents you've got and just making sure you do the right things every day and you'll still get there in the end.
I do really like that, Rob, because it's something we talk about separately a lot, but focusing on what you're good at and doubling down on that. And then we also talk about systems and goals and sometimes combine the two there, but bringing them all together, I think what makes this book so interesting, and that combination is why it's so powerful. And I love books like these because they make you think. When a book makes you think and think about things you already know, yourself, but really gets you to get into that mindset, that's when powerful things can happen. A lot of people just get caught up with life and don't really take the time to have good reflection periods, I guess is the best way to put it, and really just contemplate and think about things. Because if you're a busy person and people go, how have you guys got time to do that? But I actually schedule a couple of hours out each week now just for reflection. And you may think I'm a bit mad, and you might be right. But what I find from doing that, and it took me a long time to force myself into the habit of doing it, but what I find beneficial is the thoughts and ideas that come from those sessions are so powerful that it's actually some of the best time I spend all week. So it's a really interesting book. Highly recommend it. Of course, you're going to find this book and other books through the show notes. And your postman will not be happy when he delivers this next book, which is Tools of the Titans by Tim Ferriss, because it's a beast, Rob. What a huge book.
Yeah, it is massive, but there's no need to be intimidated by it because it's broken up into lots of different parts. So Tim Ferriss, if you don't know him, is the author of The 4-Hour Workweek and several other books. He's got a very popular podcast called The Tim Ferriss Show. And on that podcast, he interviews top performers in lots of different fields. So there'll be very famous people who you're aware of are the best in their field, but then he'll also speak to people like sort of gymnastics coaches, but who are the absolute best at what they do, but you wouldn't really have heard of them necessarily. And in this book, he basically goes through all that audio and pulls out the key lessons and the points from each of those. So it's broken down into each individual person. So it's a really great book for just kind of picking up, reading a few pages and learning something new. So for this one, there's no specific lesson that I could pull out, but there are probably hundreds of different lessons and resources and ideas that you can go away and check out. I read this on my Kindle and I ended up with most of it highlighted with kind of really interesting quotes and ideas and things I wanted to check out. So it's a big book, but it's not like a wordy, waffly book. It's really dense and there's loads of great information in there as well.
Yeah, I've got the paperback or hardback. It's kind of a hybrid between the two version. And you're going to need your sticky notes for this one to put in, and it'll be full. It'll be full by the time you finish. I think podcast listeners will really like this one, particularly people who like the resource of the week. It's full of tips. It's full of actionable advice. It's just where to start. It's so comprehensive. It's really, really good. So check it out.
Okay, next book. Not quite sure how to say its title, as this is a family show. I know that people have listened to this with their kids, so I'm going to have to get creative with this one. So the book is called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a shall we say a fig? A Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fig? That sounds quite old-fashioned. I like
Robert
that.
Dix, what filth have you allowed into this show?
Wash your mouth out. Yeah, this is a book by Mark Manson. He's a great writer, great blogger. I've actually met him. He looks a lot like Michael Bublé. Interesting fact. But anyway, more interesting is his book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fig. And really, it's a very, very simple lesson, but like lots of things, you can sum it up in a sentence, but the real power comes from actually reading it and having this lesson reinforced. It's basically about perspective and not being bothered by small stuff. So there's a great quote in it that I think sums the whole thing up, which is, in life, we have a limited amount of figs to give, so you must choose your figs wisely. And Rob, there's so much in property investment that you could apply that to.
I think you have to. If you get caught up by every little negative aspect or event that occurs, then you're really, really going to struggle. I think being exposed to hundreds of deals at a time because there's all going through the business, through either the sourcing side or through the management side, because there's so many properties going through at one time or being managed at one time that you constantly see things. So maybe I've found it easier because I've just been exposed to so much to understand what's important and what isn't. But I do find it really easy not to give a fig about the small stuff. And I really do think this is a huge factor to happiness. Because if you don't let the small stuff bother you, you know, the saying, don't sweat the small stuff. Easy to say, I appreciate for some might be harder to implement. But if you can truly live that, then life is such a nicer place to be, I can assure you. I'm a pretty chirpy guy 90% of the time. Don't get me wrong, when I'm tired, I'm hungry, I'm grumpy and stay away. You don't want to go near me. But the rest of the time, I'm pretty chirpy. And I think at least one of the reasons why is that by not giving a fig by the small stuff, letting small things bring your day down quickly. Because there's loads of small things that you could allow to bother you or bring you down in life itself, not just in property. And if every time those things happen, you allow it to affect your happiness or your motivation or your drive, then you're not going to get far. So I think if people read this book and can really onboard it into their own lives, it could be the most powerful book they read in the list.
It could. And this is something that I've improved at. I've trained myself to get better at. I am by nature a worrier, and I used to really get bothered by lots of small things, and I'd get bothered by all the things that were happening. I'd even be bothered by the things that weren't happening but might. And in property, you can't survive that way, because when you get to a portfolio of a certain size, there's always something going on. And like Rob said, you just can't let it affect your mood. So I love books like this because I make a habit of seeking them out to make sure that I can reinforce this and don't slip back into sort of my old ways of worrying too much. So if it feels like an impossible dream at the moment, well, start with this book, make a habit of it, and you will find it possible to work towards being as chirpy as Mr. B.
Don't worry, be happy. Which leads me nicely into the next book, which is Delivering Happiness by Tony Hsieh. One of my all-time favourite business books. And a great book if you are involved in property, because therefore you have a business, whether you like it or not. Or if you have a business, or if you just want to understand what good service looks like, or you just want to be entertained because it's an entertaining read as well. Delivering Happiness by Tony Hsieh is a fantastic book. Now, Tony had built a few companies very successfully before he got involved in Zappos. Zappos is a huge shoe company in America. It's $1 billion business. It's huge. It's absolutely massive. Not over here, so people may have not heard of it, but in America, it's well known. And it's known for its service. Tony is famous for saying that his shoe company is not a shoe company, but a service company. And the lessons you can learn from this to be a better landlord or a better operator in property are fantastic. I've recently put together a book list that all new starters at RMP have to read. And along with some of Rob's amazing books, and that's true, they are in the list, Delivering Happiness is one of the other books as well. It's a brilliant book. And I think the people who work with RMP in Yellow hopefully can see the influence it's had on our businesses.
Yeah, it really is a great book, and it's amazing because you think, oh, well, yeah, it's a company that sells shoes online. What can you do with that business to really stand out? You've got the same shoes as anyone else, but there are so many examples of what he's done to provide an amazing service to the customers, like literally remarkable in that people will tell their friends about it as a result, and they'll sort of really benefit from word of mouth marketing in that sense, but also what he did internally to make it an amazing place to work and attract the best people and retain the best people. So you might think, I've just got a couple of properties. What does that mean to me? I think when you get into the mindset of it, you'd be surprised by the things that you can do to really stand out. And it's really easy to stand out because most businesses are just the same. And people copy their competitors. Maybe they do it a little bit better, a little bit worse, but they're essentially just copying. If you do something that stands out, it's actually really easy to do, and you'll be amazed at what a difference it makes.
So that's it. That's our five amazing resources. So make sure you go to the show notes this week. We've given you the link already, but you don't want to miss out. It's thepropertyhub.net/non-property books. And before we get into next week's topic and tell you more about what's coming up, we need to applaud the following two individuals because they're both short, so I'll get through them quick, for these fantastic reviews. And the first one comes from Haroon, and Haroon says, I've been listening to your podcasts on 1.5 speed to get the content a bit faster as I started listening right at the beginning. You can't listen to that bit, Haroon, because I went too fast. I've got through about 50 episodes, and I can honestly say the value of information and style of the presentation is second to none. Really glad to stumbled across it. It's now a staple for my property education. Thanks, guys. And Guy says, I've just wanted to say a few words to the quality of the podcast and the whole Property Hub structure. The content is first class, very honest and realistic to true property investing. Rob and Rob are both very generous with their time and offer a fantastic overview of the whole property business. A big thanks. Well, a big thanks to you two. Thank you very much for your reviews.
Yes, thank you so much. We love getting reviews. We really appreciate it. If you haven't left us a review yet, go on, get it done. Open up iTunes, click that review button. Give us 5 stars if you want to. Give us any number of stars, but ideally 5. And if you leave a few words, we will read them out on the show. And
just think, if you're going to the Brighton meetup and you're going to say to Rob, I really enjoyed the podcast, and you haven't left a review, that's going to be awkward. So Brighton people, you definitely need to do it.
I will ask, and it will be awkward if you don't do it. So today is your chance.
Rob's practiced his awkward silence, and he's got it. He's got it in his armoury.
Yeah, I'm not afraid to use it either. So yes, please do leave us an iTunes review, and please do listen next week, because this is based off a kind of question that we get asked every so often. And I like this question because it really gets me thinking. It's, what would you do differently if you started investing again? So that's what we're going to explore next week. We'll talk about what we would do differently and maybe share some things that we would avoid or have done more of, and sort of give you some things that you can learn from. And also maybe get you thinking, if you've been in it a while, about what you would do differently if you started again. So it should be a thought-provoking episode.
Now, if you've enjoyed this episode, you'll really enjoy the next magazine, because the next magazine, we've got multiple features, but we're also going to look at our favourite non-property books. And yes, the list will be different to what you've just gone through. So we're going to give at least 5 more non-property books that we really recommend. So if you're a bookworm, you should be reading the magazine anyway, because it's full of amazing content. But you'll have to get it now, because we're going to give you even more book recommendations. And a thank you to everyone who joined us for the webinar for magazine subscribers. We did the first one all around goals, and that was really popular and got some really nice feedback. That's another benefit of subscribing to the magazine as well, is that you get to join us every issue for a live webinar where Rob and I will cover a subject and do a live Q&A around that subject too. So a bit of a no-brainer as a resource. Let's make that our resource, Rob. The magazine. That's what people should do this week, is if you haven't yet, sign up to the magazine. And if you've got the magazine, tell other people, spread the good word.
Yep, do it. Send them over to thepropertyhub.net/magazine. That's all you need to do. You'll get the next issue and all future issues. You'll also immediately get digital access to all the back issues. So as if you didn't have enough reading to do after this episode, you'll have even more. So we'd better leave you to it. Stop listening, start reading, but make sure you're back listening on Tuesday for Ask Rob and Rob, and then we'll be back here again next Thursday for the Property Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great week. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Property Podcast. For show notes, all our past episodes, and to leave a review, go to thepropertyhub.net/podcast.